I've now finished volume 2 of The Three Kingdoms. Now, I'm not done with the book yet. I still have volume 3 and volume 4 to go before I'm finished with this book. But having finished volume 2, I thought I'd take a moment or two and just talk about my thoughts on volume 2. I've already done a couple videos on this book. I did a started video in which I talked about my reasons for wanting to read this book in the first place. And after finishing volume 1, I did a video recounting what happened in volume 1. So I'm not going to re-go through everything, but in case you missed those videos, just very briefly, this is a classic Chinese novel. It was written in the 14th century. It's a historical novel about events that happened at the end of the 2nd century and the 3rd century. So it's written in the 14th century, but it's about the 2nd and the 3rd century. The edition I have is in 4 volumes. I'm holding 3 volumes, but that's because first volume I've already finished, and so I returned it to the library. I was done with it, so why not let somebody else read it, huh? Here is volume 2, volume 2, 3, and 4. These volumes are the divisions that this publisher has made. The original book is just considered one whole book. Of course, it's way too big to be published as a single volume, but different publishers will divide it differently. These are 4 small volumes. I've seen it divided into 3 volumes by some publishers. I've seen publishers divide it into 2 large volumes, etc. But the publisher I'm reading here, which is Foreign Languages Press out of Beijing, has volume 2, being chapters 33 to 63 of this book. So I'll try and talk about what happens in those chapters. The United Chinese Empire already fell apart in volume 1 of the Three Kingdoms. We are now in volume 2 of the Three Kingdoms, and I'm a little bit surprised that at the end of volume 2, so some 63 chapters, 1,104 pages into this story, and the Three Kingdoms still have not yet fully emerged. They're almost there. So we do have the Northern Kingdom of Cao Cao or Cao Cao. We've got the Southern Kingdom of Sun Quan, and apologies for mispronouncing all the Chinese names. But then the Western Kingdom of Liu Bei has not yet formed, although we can see it in its genesis. Liu Bei is looking to expand his power base. But we are still in the scramble for territory phase of the story. We haven't gotten to the point where there are 3 separate, stable, independent kingdoms. So I had thought I don't know, the historical period in question, and as I've mentioned in previous videos, I really knew very little to nothing about this before starting this novel. But based on what I've looked up on Wikipedia and stuff like that, it looks like the historical period in question is going to end, I think, in the end of the 3rd century when the Three Kingdoms are reunited into one single empire. And I had thought that we would have established those 3 kingdoms by now. I'm wondering what's going to happen in the 3rd and 4th volumes. Is this series going to take us all the way to the end of the Three Kingdoms periods? Or, I mean, based on the pacing, I just kind of assumed we'd be further along now than we are. But anyways, into the 2nd volume, the Three Kingdoms are still in the process of being formed. At least the third kingdom, the Western kingdom of Liu Bei, has not been formed. So in this volume, we've got Cao Cao, who's established his power base up in the north. We've got Sun Quan, who's established himself in the south. And Liu Bei, who's still looking to carve out his territory and is moving around from different patrons. Liu Bei ends up in the western riverlands in a territory called, I'm going to mispronounce this, but Jingzhou, something like that. Starts with a J, where one of his relatives, who's got a name that looks very similar, Liu Biao. They both have the same surname, Liu, and names that starts with a B. Anyways, he's with his kinsmen down there, and his advisors are recommending him to take over the territory from his kinsmen. But he refuses to do that because it would be dishonorable to take over territory from the kinsmen. Liu Bei is portrayed as the hero of this story, the honorable man in a time of dishonor. He also, during this period, acquires a few different advisors, the most famous of which is Sleeping Dragon. And like everybody in this book, he's got a couple different names. He's got his real name, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, but then he's got his nickname, Kong Min. Hopefully that's a close pronunciation. And then his monikers is Sleeping Dragon. So this is based on a real historical person, but the version we get in this novel is heavily based on folklore or legend. And I can say that without even really knowing the real history, just from the description that you read here, you just know that this is largely based on folklore and legend. He's the stereotypical mystical sage, although he's young. He's like an old man in a young man's body. I tend to forget he's actually much younger than Liu Bei, because he's just portrayed as this very wise old man, even though he's a young man. Anyways, Liu Bei is told about the sleeping dragon, who's off in the countryside living a rustic life, removed from politics. Liu Bei finally journeys to meet him and persuades him to come and join him. And the sleeping dragon character is portrayed as being a military genius, but also a genius in knowing people's characters and predicting how they will react. And it's all completely unrealistic. Like, I was listening to the podcast Discourse of the Three Kingdoms, which is a podcast all about this book. And one of the guests on the show said of Sleeping Dragon, said, come on, nobody's that good. And of course, come on, nobody is that good. But for a folktale, or for kind of a legend, or kind of a romantic version of history, which I guess is what you're getting in this novel, I think it's all part of the fun. So there are all these plots that the other warlords and their advisors hatch, and he's just always one step ahead of them. He knows what they're going to do. He knows what they're thinking, and it's completely unrealistic, but it's a lot of fun to just watch him always outwit them. Most of the time, he just uses really brilliant military strategy, combined with his just really good character analysis. Like, he just knows people and he knows how they're going to react. A couple times there are hints of the supernatural being brought in there. Like he's able to read the stars and kind of predict the future, or he's able to, uh, um, in one famous part, he's able to summon the wind because he knows the secret words to summon the wind. So the elements of the supernatural are, to my mind, cheapen it a little bit. I would have preferred if there was no supernatural and he was just, like a human computer who was just always able to predict what was going to happen based on his observations, like kind of like a Sherlock Holmes type character. But it does seem to flip back and forth between the two. But anyways, this sleeping dragon character, who's this brilliant master strategist, ends up with Liu Bei. And then Cao Cao, the warlord in the north, who is in the process of just taking everything over, is expanding down southwards. And with the intent to take over both Liu Bei's territory and the southern kingdom of Sun Quan. So naturally, Sun Quan and Liu Bei eventually link up. And Sleeping Dragon goes over to advise Sun Quan's advisors and his soldiers. And he, again, is so brilliant and so prescient. Is that the word prescient? That Sun Quan's chief advisor thinks, okay, this guy is helping us now, but he's not one of our men. He's one of Liu Bei's men, and we're in this temporary alliance. So once we defeat Cao Cao, then we could be back at war with Liu Bei. So I need to eliminate him now while he's in our kingdom. And he has all these plots set up to assassinate or kill Sleeping Dragon, but Sleeping Dragon always predicts the plot. He's always one step ahead, and so he always says, I predicted you were going to try and kill me this way, and that's why I did all this 2 days ago to foil your plot. And again, it's completely unrealistic, but it's a lot of fun. So despite a little bit of the squabbling, they are working together, and they do. There's I don't know how many chapters, but there's a whole bunch of chapters of planning and spying, building up to this big battle at Red Cliffs. Now, I mentioned before that I didn't really know much at all. I didn't really know anything at all about the actual history before I started reading this novel. But since I've started reading this novel, I've been, as you do, looking stuff up on Wikipedia, watching a couple of YouTube videos. I've tried to avoid spoiling everything, but when you read a historical novel nowadays, you do kind of research the history as you read it, right? I think most of us do that. So I had known that Red Cliffs, the battle at Red Cliffs, was one of the most important battles of this period. And it's a battle where Cao Cao, the northern warlord, despite having this huge numerical superiority, is just handed a devastating defeat, which effectively stops his southern expansion. Otherwise, he would have just continued and taken over all of China, and then we wouldn't have had the period of the Three Kingdoms. We would have just had the new Cao Cao Empire. But he gets a massive defeat at this big battle, the Battle of the Red Cliffs, which is, I'm given to understand, very famous in Chinese history, and which is built up brilliantly in this historical novel with a whole bunch of build up to it, so that when Cao Cao finally gets his defeat, it's very satisfying after a lot of build up. So Cao Cao retreats up north, and he ends up dealing with some tribes or some attacks from his western flank up in the north. Meanwhile, the fragile alliance between Liu Bei and the southern kingdom continue. They're nominally allies, but they're anticipating a showdown with each other sooner or later because they both covet the same territory, the Western Riverlands, and they're arguing about who's going to take it. Again, there's plots that the Southern advisors launched to assassinate Liu Bei, which Sleeping Dragon foils. They make an offer of the sister of Sun Quan, the ruler of the Southern Kingdom, to marry Liu Bei, which is initially just a plan to trick Liu Bei into coming down to be assassinated. But then, because Sleeping Dragon foils that assassination plot, they actually do go through with the marriage. And she is over and comes over with Liu Bei until she returns home. Liu Bei, meanwhile, gets invited in by one of his kingsmen in the neighboring Riverlands to help with some of the defenses, but then Liu Bei is becoming very popular and is actually taking over that territory. And now they are fighting back against him. And that's basically where the second volume ends. So Liu Bei is still establishing his territory. Be interesting to see how far the story goes in 3 and 4, volumes 3 and 4. At what point will the three kingdoms be established? Is this novel going to take us all the way through to the fall of those three kingdoms and the reunification of China? It would be interesting to see. But before I finish this video, I should make a brief comment on just the readability and enjoyability of this book. I am really glad I'm reading this book because of all the various names, both place names and people names. It does require some attentive reading, but it's doable. You don't have to be like a genius or anything to understand this book. You just have to kind of read it a bit slowly and take note of a lot of the names that pop up. Although there are a lot of names. The minor names I don't even worry about. If a name is important, it'll pop up enough times that it'll stick in your memory. When I initially started reading this book, the first chapter, I thought, all these Chinese names, I'm never going to be able to keep these straight, because the Chinese names are so different to us Westerners. But as I've progressed through the book, I've gotten used to it, and it's not a problem. You get used to it. And the book is a lot of fun, a lot of interesting things happening for the history nerd. There is a lot of fascinating history in here, even though the novel does apparently diverge from the real history. So people tell me. I'm not an expert on this period. But it's just a really interesting story. And this is one of those things where, I've been meaning to read this book for years. These types of books, the classics that you think you should read someday and you've been meaning to get around to them and you just keep putting it off. And then once you finally do read it, you think, oh, this is really enjoyable. I don't know why I put this off for so many years. This is one of those books. It is really enjoyable. I don't know why I put it off for so many years. If you happen to see this at your local library or at your bookstore, I would recommend it. Now, take me with a grain of salt, because I haven't finished it yet. Still have volumes 3 and 4 to go yet, but really enjoying it so far. So, yeah. So, I will continue on with volume 3, and then when I finish volume 3, I'll try and make another video, and then on to volume 4, and etc.